Everyone in the luxury Manhattan restaurant froze the moment she spoke. A barefoot little black girl, no older than 9, stood in front of billionaire Edward Langston, calmly saying, "Feed me, and I'll heal your son." The entire dining room turned to watch, forks suspended, mid-air, as Edward's face turned crimson. "Security, get this thing out of here before I throw her out myself," he roared. But Naomi, the girl, didn't flinch. In her tattered dress and steady gaze, she stared directly at the man who had just stripped her of her humanity in front of 50 guests. Seated beside Edward was Leo, his 12-year-old son, paralyzed from the waist down since the accident 4 years ago. Naomi repeated softly, "Just a plate of food. In return, I can help your son." Edward laughed, cruelly. "Heal him? Who do you think you are? God?" The room filled with uncomfortable silence, yet Naomi stood still, strangely radiant. She reached toward Leo's wheelchair and gently touched the armrest. "Do you feel anything now?" she asked. Leo's eyes widened. I feel something, like tingling." The laughter died in Edward's throat. What began as an act of mockery turned into a miracle, and Edward Langston's life would never be the same again. But instead of gratitude, he responded with rage, unaware that this small girl had just ignited the unraveling of everything he thought he controlled. Leo Langston had never seen his father look so shaken. The once unshakable Edward Langston, billionaire real estate mogul feared in boardrooms across the country, now stood, trembling beside his son's wheelchair in the middle of the most expensive restaurant in the Manhattan. Just seconds earlier, he had shoved a barefoot little girl Naomi out of frustration and disbelief. She had touched Leo's wheelchair and asked a question no one had ever dared to ask since the accident. "Do you feel anything in your legs now?" At first, Edward dismissed it as nonsense. How could a dirty child in a torn dress do what world-renowned doctors from Switzerland to the Mayo Clinic had failed to do in 4 years? But when Leo whispered, "Dad, I feel tingling," the blood drained from Edward's face. He tried to laugh it off, to explain it away as suggestion, imagination, desperation. Anything but real. Naomi didn't say another word. She simply stood up, brushed the dust from her skirt, and looked at Edward with a calm that rattled him more than any lawsuit ever had. "You've just made a serious mistake," she said. Then she turned and walked out of the restaurant, unnoticed by security, untouched by the dozens of wealthy eyes following her every step. Leo cried out, begging her to stay. "Wait, please come back." But she didn't stop, not even when she reached the ornate glass doors. There, she turned once more to look at Edward, locking eyes with him. In that one moment, he felt utterly exposed, like she could see the cruel, calculating parts of his soul he worked so hard to hide. Her words echoed like thunder. "Some mistakes can't be undone with money, Mr. Langston. But maybe, just maybe, you'll learn that there are things in this world far more powerful than your hatred." Then she was gone, but the miracle remained. Over the next few days, Leo's condition continued to improve in ways no one could explain. He could feel warmth and cold, pressure, movement. By the end of the week, his toes were moving freely. His doctors ran test after test, MRIs, blood work, neurological scans. "There is no explanation for this," one specialist muttered. "What we're seeing shouldn't be possible." Edward refused to believe. "It's psychological," he insisted. "Some kind of manipulation. Hypnosis, maybe. A scam." But no one had asked for money. No one had contacted him. Naomi had vanished without a trace. Still, Edward doubled down. He hired private investigators, distributed flyers, and even offered a $50,000 reward for information on the girl. Not to thank her, but to expose her. "She humiliated me," he growled to himself. Made a fool of me in front of everyone. This is a setup. Someone sent her to destroy me. But what truly haunted Edward was the growing realization that this miracle had nothing to do with him. Naomi hadn't healed him. She had healed his son, the one person in Edward's life he had truly failed to protect. And now that Leo was getting better, Edward felt more powerless than ever, because the more his son walked, smiled, and laughed again, the clearer it became that Edward hadn't just been wrong about Naomi. He had been wrong about everything. His anger, his arrogance, his belief that money solved everything. Naomi had shattered all of it with one act of kindness and one unshakable truth. He didn't deserve the miracle that had entered his life, but Leo did. And that truth burned more deeply than any loss Edward had ever suffered. Edward Langston couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. That barefoot girl, with the steady gaze, Naomi, who had entered his world like a whisper and left like a storm. But it wasn't guilt that kept him awake. It was obsession. He had built a $200 million empire on control, precision, and predictability. But nothing about her made sense. No name, no records, no camera footage of her entering the restaurant. It was as if she had materialized out of thin air just to challenge him. Find her, he barked at his private investigators, pacing his penthouse like a caged animal. I don't care what it costs. 3 different agencies worked around the clock. They combed shelters, schools, hospitals, and foster care systems across the state. Nothing. No matches. No leads. No trace of a girl like Naomi anywhere. The mystery was driving Edward mad. But more than that, it was the fact that she hadn't asked for anything. Not money, not favors, not even recognition, just food. And in return, she gave his son, Leo, something the world's best doctors couldn't. Hope, but Edward couldn't accept that. It has to be a trick, he muttered again and again. It's all manipulation. Maybe Leo's mind is playing games with him. Yet each day, Leo could move more, feel more, walk farther, laugh louder. Edward's denial turned to anger. He placed ads on radio stations, billboards, and even social media, something he normally found beneath him. He offered $50,000 for any information leading to Naomi. His reputation began to suffer, but he didn't care. He stormed into shelters, harassed school staff, and cornered street vendors, shoving a blurry photo of Naomi into their faces. She must be hiding somewhere, he told himself, voice cracking. They're helping her, protecting her. Even his own son started to question him. Dad, maybe she didn't want anything, Leo said gently one morning. Edward snapped. Don't be naive. People like her don't do miracles for free. It always starts small, a favor, a trick. Then comes the price. Leo fell silent, but disappointment etched into his face. Edward didn't notice. He was too busy chasing a ghost. What made it worse was that stories of Naomi started popping up in the most unlikely places. People Edward had wronged quietly, brutally, legally, were suddenly getting second chances. Margaret Allen, the teacher Edward had fired for questioning his education cuts, was appointed principal of the city's most prestigious school. Franklin Reed, a disabled veteran he'd evicted during a real estate deal, was hired by a rival firm and back on his feet. Mr. Hayes, an old man who once begged outside a church after Edward ruined his farm, was now working at a nonprofit smiling. Each of them had something in common: a strange encounter with a little black girl who offered them hope when no one else did. Edward dismissed it all as a coordinated setup. She's targeting me, he snarled to his assistant. It's a smear campaign. But deep down, something else was gnawing at him. Leo had stopped asking about the reward, money. He had stopped defending his father. And Edward noticed how the boy's eyes lit up, only when talking about Naomi. She helped me, Leo said simply one evening. And you treated her like trash. That night, Edward stood alone in his office, staring at a wall of blurry surveillance images. All the power in the world, and he couldn't control a 9-year-old girl. He punched his desk, blood staining his knuckles. But across the city, Naomi sat quietly in a small cafe, sipping a warm drink someone had offered her. She watched the rain fall and listened to the whispers about a man unraveling. And when asked why she didn't run, why she stayed in a city that was hunting her, Naomi smiled and said softly, "Because some people need to face the truth about who they are, before they can choose who they want to become." While Edward Langston tore through the city in fury, desperately hunting for the girl who had humiliated him, Naomi was quietly changing lives, one broken soul at a time. She never appeared with fanfare. She never asked for credit. But wherever she went, something shifted. People who had long given up suddenly found reason to hope again. And, strangely, many of them shared a painful link. They were victims of Edward Langston's past. Greed. One of the first was Margaret Allen, a retired schoolteacher Edward had forced into early retirement after she challenged his decision to cut funding for low-income schools. Margaret had been scraping by on a small pension, living in a cramped apartment filled with books and memories. One rainy afternoon, Naomi knocked on her door, drenched and shivering. "I just need a glass of water," she said softly. Margaret, moved by something in the girl's eyes, let her in. By the end of the week, Margaret received a phone call from the city's Department of Education. She had been selected as the new principal of Westbrook Academy, a prestigious charter school undergoing reform. "We found your name in a glowing anonymous recommendation," the official said. "Your past students speak of you like you're a legend." A few days later, Franklin Reed, a disabled Army veteran evicted by Edward's real estate project, met Naomi outside the homeless shelter. She handed him a hot meal, looked him in the eye, and said, "You fought for others. Now it's time someone fights for you." The next, a week, Franklin was offered a job as head of security at a veterans center. No explanation, no interview, just a chance. It kept happening. Mr. Hayes, the farmer Edward bankrupted years ago, received an anonymous grant to rebuild his land. Olivia Moore, a single mother evicted during Edward's condo expansion, was given stable housing and a scholarship to complete her degree. Each person spoke of the same little girl, black, barefoot, dressed simply, but carrying a quiet power that calmed even the most broken hearts. Some said she was an angel. Others thought she was a genius hiding in plain sight. But all agreed, she showed up exactly when they needed her most. Meanwhile, Edward remained blind to it all. He drove through neighborhoods he once ordered bulldozed, yelling at strangers and shoving Naomi's photo in their faces. "She's trying to destroy me," he screamed at a shelter employee who had refused to give him access. "She's orchestrating all this to take me down." But he never stopped to consider why these people were rising again, or how they had been trampled in the first place. Back at a small cafe, Naomi sat sipping hot chocolate, her legs curled under her in a booth by the window. Sarah, the cafe's owner, approached her cautiously. She had read about the paralyzed and billionaire search in the papers, had seen Naomi's face on flyers. She also remembered that, 3 months ago, she was about to shut down her struggling cafe, until this same little girl walked in, soaked from the rain. "You're not going to close," Naomi had said that day. "Something will happen that changes everything." And it did. A renowned food blogger accidentally visited the cafe, wrote a viral review, and turned Sarah's little shop into a city favorite overnight. Now, Sarah sat beside Naomi and whispered, "He's still looking for you. Why don't you leave?" Naomi looked out the window at Edward pacing the sidewalk with 2 private investigators behind him. "Because sometimes," she said quietly, "the only way someone can see who they really are is when the whole world is watching." Sarah shivered. "You mean You're letting him expose himself? Naomi nodded. He's showing everyone the truth I already saw. And this time, there's no boardroom door to hide behind. She pulled out a small phone. An old model, filled with footage. Videos of Edward, threatening school principals, screaming at children, offering bribes, pushing elderly men. All captured by people Naomi had quietly inspired to stand up and record. Truth is a mirror, Naomi said. Some people need to be shattered before they see their own reflection. It was a Thursday afternoon when Edward Langston's empire began to fall apart. Live in front of the entire country. He had been pacing his office, as he had for days. Eyes bloodshot, tie loosened, mind spiraling. His phone buzzed constantly, calls from investors, board members, lawyers, but he ignored them. All he could think about was Naomi, the girl who had entered his life, uninvited, and left behind a trail of questions he couldn't answer. Then his secretary burst into the room, pale and breathless. "Mr. Langston, you need to see this." She grabbed the remote and turned on the large flat screen in his office. It was Channel 7. News. The headline froze Edward's blood. The cruel hunt of a billionaire. Exclusive report on Edward, Langston's obsession. And just below, a bold label read, "Live investigation. Hosted by Patricia West." Edward stumbled into his chair. On screen, the respected journalist Patricia West looked directly into the camera. "For the past 15 days, our investigative team has followed the troubling behavior of real estate mogul Edward Langston, a man known for his wealth, influence, and power. But what we uncovered is far more disturbing than any business scandal. What you're about to see are unedited recordings of Mr. Langston, taken in public during his obsessive pursuit of a 9-year-old girl." The first video began to play. Edward's voice thundered through the speakers. "These people always protect their own kind. She's hiding somewhere. If I have to burn this neighborhood to the ground, I'll find her." The footage showed him shoving an elderly woman aside, screaming at a child, and offering a street vendor money for information. "No, no, no," Edward mumbled, grabbing his phone. He dialed furiously. "Richardson, shut it down. Sue them. Defamation, invasion of privacy, whatever it takes." His lawyer's voice was unusually tense. "Edward, I'm watching it too, and you can't stop it. The footage is legal, all taken in, public, and there's more." On screen, Patricia continued, "We've also uncovered that this man stormed into an elementary school, disrupting classes and terrifying children while searching for the girl. In this next video, he refers to her as a monkey." The entire office fell silent. Then came footage of Edward offering a $50,000 bribe to a police officer. "This child is not normal," he said on camera. "I don't care what it takes. Turn this place upside down." Edward's secretary covered her mouth, horrified. But Patricia wasn't finished. "We've also obtained private recordings where Mr. Langston openly brags about destroying families who stood in his way." The screen flashed with transcribed audio. "Henderson was just a stubborn farmer. Now he's begging in front of a church. That's the cost of challenging me." At that moment, the board of Edward's company called an emergency vote. Investors fled. His bank accounts froze. Credit cards were denied. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. But the final blow came not from a camera, but from the doorway. Naomi walked in. She was calm, composed, as if she were simply arriving to return a borrowed book. "You," Edward gasped. "You did this. You planned this." "No," Naomi replied, her voice steady. "I just let you show the world who you really are." Behind her, a second figure appeared. Leo. But this time, he wasn't in a wheelchair. He walked firmly, confidently, across the room toward his father. "Dad," he said, disappointment heavy in his tone. "I saw everything on the news, all of it. She helped me. And you tried to destroy her." Edward's knees gave out. He collapsed into his chair, defeated. "How?" he whispered. "How are you walking?" Naomi's reply was quiet but devastating. You were too busy hating to see the miracle happening right in front of you. As Patricia West's final words rang out from the screen, while Edward Langston was hunting a child, she was healing a community. Edward realized something more painful than any financial loss. He had lost the only thing that ever truly mattered, his son's respect, and no amount of money could buy that back. 6 months had passed since Edward Langston lost everything. The mansion in the hills, the fleet of luxury cars, the empire that once bore his name gone. His face, once featured on Forbes and business magazines, had become a cautionary meme on social media. Headlines labeled him the fallen tycoon, and even his closest allies had abandoned him. Now, Edward lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city, the kind of place he used to bulldoze to build luxury condos. He spent his days reading rejection letters, one after another. No corporation wanted his name on their payroll. He was, in every sense, radioactive. From his small kitchen window, he could see the nearby park where his son Leo often played. Not alone, but with Naomi and Patricia West, the journalist whose investigation had shattered Edward's public image. Leo laughed freely now, chasing frisbees and kicking soccer balls. His legs fully healed, but he no longer lived with his father. After the media storm, custody had been transferred to his mother. Edward watched from afar, guilt growing like rust on his soul. One day, his phone rang. It was Richardson, his former attorney. "I've got something for you," he said. "A volunteer position at the Harmony Street shelter. No pay, but they're willing to take you." Edward didn't hesitate. "I'll take it." The shelter was a world Edward had never known. Children without families, mothers escaping abuse, men broken by addiction and poverty. In the past, he would have seen them as liabilities. Now, he saw them as mirrors, reflecting everything he had ignored. At first, no one trusted him. They recognized his face. Some spat near his shoes. Others whispered behind his back. But Edward showed up every day. He scrubbed floors, cleaned bathrooms, carried boxes, served food. He never asked for thanks. He just worked quietly, humbly. One day, an 8-year-old girl named Sophie approached him while he was fixing a broken bookshelf. "You look sad," she said. "Like I used to. But people get better. If they want to." Something cracked open inside Edward. Weeks turned into months. The shelter's staff began noticing real change. Not performative. Not image repair, but transformation. He spoke gently, listened carefully. He even began using his business knowledge to help expand the shelter's programs, writing grant proposals, organizing donations, creating job training workshops. Occasionally, Naomi would visit. The first time she saw Edward there, she didn't speak. She just watched from a distance and nodded. Some people, she later told Patricia, have to lose everything to find who they really are. Even Leo began visiting. Not out of obligation, but curiosity. He wanted to see if his father's change was real. "Have you really changed, Dad?" Leo asked one day. "I'm trying," Edward replied honestly. "I can't undo the past, but I want to earn the future." That was the moment Leo smiled, for the first time in a long time. Edward never returned to power or wealth, but he discovered something he had never truly known: purpose. At Harmony Street, he was no longer Mr. Langston the billionaire. He was just Edward, someone trying to do right. And that, at last, was enough. 2 years had passed since Edward Langston lost his fortune, his reputation, and the empire he once ruled with iron certainty. And yet, in that quiet loss, something remarkable had grown, something far more valuable than wealth. He now served as the assistant director of the Harmony Street shelter, the very place that had once regarded him with suspicion. The man who once tore down neighborhoods now helped build futures for the people who had lived in them. His days were filled with simple, honest work, organizing education programs, helping residents find jobs, and mentoring troubled youth. He didn't seek attention. He didn't speak of redemption. He simply did the work. And slowly, people began to believe in him again, not because of what he said, but because of what he did. His name no longer struck fear. It sparked curiosity. Can people really change? They'd ask. If you walked into the shelter today, you wouldn't recognize the former billionaire. You'd see a man rolling up his sleeves to clean a clogged drain or sitting on the floor helping a child. Red. And most days, if you looked outside at the park across the street, you'd find Leo no longer a fragile boy in a wheelchair, but a strong, confident teen, often playing soccer or helping at the shelter himself. Naomi, now 11, still visited the shelter when she could. Though her fame had grown, countless families had come forward to share how she'd changed their lives. She remained unchanged in spirit. She wore the same simple clothes. She never asked for praise. At a school assembly one spring morning, Naomi stood before hundreds of students and parents, speaking for the first time about what healing really meant. True healing, she said, is not just about fixing what's broken. It's about teaching people how not to break others. It's about forgiveness that isn't earned, but given freely, so people can try again. In the back of the auditorium, Edward Langston sat silently, hands clasped, tears in his eyes. He hadn't spoken to Naomi since that day she walked into his office and told him he'd been too busy hating to see the miracle before him. But today, he watched her with nothing but awe and gratitude. After the speech, Leo found his father leaning against the wall outside. "She meant you, didn't she?" he asked softly. Edward didn't deny it. "I think she meant all of us." Later that year, Patricia West, who had won the National Journalism Award for her exposé on Edward's downfall, returned to the shelter to do a follow-up. She was surprised to find Edward still working there, humbly and consistently. "I didn't expect you to stay this long," she admitted. "I didn't expect to stay either," Edward said with a small smile. "But I guess, once you stop trying to prove you're good, you can start being good." Patricia included his story in her follow-up feature, titled "The Man Who Chose to Stay." In the months that followed, Edward helped expand the shelter's reach to 2 more cities. He developed training programs for ex-convicts, started a microloan initiative for single mothers, and mentored teens through difficult transitions. The work was slow, unglamorous, but real. He never tried to regain his old life, because for the first time, he had a new one. And this one had purpose. Naomi visited again near Christmas. She walked into the shelter without warning, like always. Edward stood by the door, unsure of what to say. She looked at him, calm as ever, and asked, "So, did you find what you were looking for?" He nodded slowly. "I found what I didn't even know I needed." She smiled and walked out. Leo, standing nearby, turned to his father. "Do you think you'll ever get back everything you lost?" Edward shook his head. "Number. And I don't need to, because now I have something I never had before." "What's that?" "A life I'm not ashamed of." And that perhaps was the greatest miracle of all. Not that Naomi had healed a broken body, but that she had helped a broken man heal himself from the inside out. In the end, this was never just a story about a billionaire, a miracle, or even a little girl who changed lives. It was about something far more universal: the power of humility, the weight of second chances, and the healing that begins when we finally choose to see each other as human. Edward Langston once believed that money could fix anything. That power gave him the right to dismiss, control, or destroy anyone who stood in his way. He thought compassion was weakness, and that those who had less were somehow worth less. But Naomi Barefoot, soft-spoken and invisible to most, proved him wrong in the most extraordinary way. Not by destroying him, but by offering him the one thing no one else dared to: mercy. She didn't ask for revenge. She asked for food. She didn't retaliate with hatred. She offered healing. And when Edward spit that mercy back in her face, she didn't curse him. She let him walk the painful road of self-discovery until he realized that true power is not control but transformation. It would have been easy for Naomi to expose him immediately, but she understood something most of us forget. Justice without redemption is only half the story. She gave Edward the freedom to fall and the dignity to rise. And perhaps that's the lesson we all need to remember. Because maybe, like Edward, we've all been blind to someone's pain. Maybe we've all said something cruel, judged someone too quickly, or ignored a cry for help because it didn't fit our idea of who deserved saving. Maybe in some way, we've all walked past our own versions of Naomi. But what if we didn't? What if, the next time someone asks for help, not money, not sympathy, just to be seen, we answered, what if we stopped measuring people by what they wear, what they earn, or where they came from, and instead looked at how they love, how they try, and how they rise again after the world pushes them down? Because the truth is, the world doesn't need more powerful people. It needs more good ones. Naomi may have been only 9 years old. She may have had no wealth, no title, no platform, but she changed a city, healed a boy, and reshaped the future of a man once thought beyond redemption, all by reminding us of this simple truth. The real cure isn't in fixing what's broken. It's in teaching people never to break others in the first place. So if this story touched your heart, even just a little, don't let it stop here. Once, Edward Langston thought power was everything. He measured success in square footage, profits, and fear. But all it took was a barefoot girl, a single plate of food, and a moment of defiance to shake his world apart. Naomi didn't fight him with lawsuits or headlines. She let him expose himself. And when he finally stood among the ruins of his reputation, she gave him a gift he never expected, a second chance. 2 years later, Edward wasn't a billionaire anymore. He was a man who mopped shelter, floors, who comforted orphaned children, who listened without interrupting. He never got back his old life. But he gained something better. The quiet dignity of redemption. Leo, once paralyzed and forgotten, now ran freely and smiled often. Naomi, still barefooted at times, continued walking into broken places and helping people stand again. And Edward? He no longer chased miracles. He became one slowly, quietly, through love, humility, and the long road of becoming good. Sometimes the greatest miracle isn't being healed. It's becoming someone who no longer hurts others. We all fall. But what defines us is who we choose to be after the fall. Did this story move you? Tell us in the comments. Have you ever seen someone change for the better? Or been given a second chance yourself? Subscribe now for more powerful stories that prove it's never too late to start again. And sometimes, the smallest souls leave the biggest marks. Power, money, and fame mean nothing without compassion and integrity. Naomi, a nameless, barefoot girl, taught one of the most powerful men in the city that true change doesn't begin with force or wealth. It begins with the courage to confront our own reflection. She didn't fight with anger. She led with grace. In a world obsessed with winning, she reminded us the real victory is choosing to become better. Because healing others is noble, but healing the part of ourselves that hurt others, that's where true transformation begins. Sometimes, the smallest voice delivers the loudest truth and the deepest lesson.